Across the Spider-Verse is shaping up to be an even bigger behemoth of a blockbuster than the first one. More worlds, more Spider-Men, and more deaths? Sit down for this one. The new trailer for this highly anticipated sequel was a lot more vague in the story department than I was expecting. But with all the interviews, teases, and the brand new plot synopsis that dropped, I think it's for a pretty good reason. Much like the first movie, I think death will play a major role in Across the Spider-Verse's story, maybe even more than the first film. Before we had the death of Miles' Peter Parker, leaving a huge impact on Miles as he suddenly finds himself having to fill some pretty big shoes, pretty much as soon as he gets his powers. And later Uncle Aaron gets capped by Kingpin, becoming to Miles what Ben is to Peter in so many universes. His death teaching Miles that with great power comes great responsibility. But here, I think death is going to play a much different role in the story, yet one that's still pretty familiar to the character of Spider-Man. It's going to be used to tell a story about revenge, with the body count of this two-part adventure potentially putting the first film to shame, in order to really drive home the stakes and moral dilemma at hand. In fact, I really think we already know who dies in the movie, with 3 major death predictions I want to throw out there a little bit later in the video. And I really gleaned all of this from the aforementioned synopsis, coupled with a few key moments from the trailer. Across the Spider-Verse follows Miles Morales as he is catapulted across the multiverse and encounters a team of spider people charged with protecting its very existence. When the heroes clash on how to handle a new threat, Miles finds himself pitted against the other spiders. This new threat in question is the Spot, whose powers are basically that the spots all over his body are portals that can send things through the Spot dimension, and he can create spots himself. There's that iconic panel of Peter punching the Spot's chest, but the fist goes through 2 spots and he ends up hitting himself instead. We also saw Miles do something similar last year in one of the promo images, trying to kick the Spot, but he ends up striking Gwen instead. Miles, my boy, you are fumbling hard. Spider-Punk don't even gotta say your girl, bro. You're doing the work for him. Now, as to why this League of Spider People are at odds with Miles on how to handle the Spot, I think the reason is pretty simple. The Spider People want to kill the Spot. No questions asked, no remorse felt. But Miles, having already spared the Kingpin, is obviously going to argue that there's another way. Why kill him when he can just be imprisoned, kept off of the streets, and potentially even be reformed? I'm not an expert on the Spot by any means, but just by reading up on his lore, he seems to fall into the pattern of Spidey villains having tragic backstories. So if Miles learns of his origins, assuming they're kept more or less the same, if not made more sympathetic, then I think it's only natural he'd approach the situation with a bit more caution and want to detain Spot with the hope of curing him rather than resorting to murder. This is backed up by Gwen's line in the new trailer, stating that they're supposed to be the good guys, with Miguel O Hara retorting that they are. It already sets the stage for a line being crossed, something that Miles and Gwen aren't comfortable with following through on. Or more so just Gwen, since Miles isn't a part of the League, but Miguel is firm on his stance that taking the Spot's life is a means that'll be justified by the ends. A little No Way Home-esque, I know, but I think the setup is already different enough from if they die, they die, to stay fresh. And I feel like they already laid the groundwork in the first movie for this to be the next step in Miles' journey. Not to mention, it's going to create the perfect inversion to the first film. The reason why Miguel and the other Spider People are hell-bent on killing Spot and preventing Miles from standing in their way is because Spot already has a lot of blood on his hands by the time he encounters Miles. Blood that's personal to these Spider People. And that takes me to my first bet for a major character death, Miguels' daughter. The only nugget of information we're given around Miguel's motivation is a shot of him staring at a video of him and his daughter, named Gabriella. You can see it right here on the cool hologram monitor thingy. Gabriella is a character made exclusively for Across the Spider-Verse, as in the comics Miguel instead has a son named Gabriel, who shares the same name with Miguel's brother. Given how aggressive Miguel is shown to be against Miles in both trailers for this movie, and his Spider-Man 2099 persona is known to be a bit more hostile than other monsters in the past, it stands to rationale that he's not pulling any punches here for good reason. Or at least, as good as he can convince himself. Me thinks Miguel and his family were attacked by the Spot prior to or at the very beginning of this movie, resulting in Miguel losing Gabriella and sending him down a dark path of revenge. If this is true, then Miguel is an inversion of Kingpin, whereas Kingpin lost his family and became desperate to find another version of them in the multiverse, stooping down to any level imaginable in order to achieve his goal. Here, Miguel is desperate to avenge his family, willing to hunt down the Spot throughout the multiverse and stooping down to any level that'll bring him peace. At least, that's what he thinks murder will bring. So in a way, Miguel might be the true antagonist of Across the Spider-Verse, challenging the idea of what it means to be Spider-Man, thus putting him at odds with both Miles and the audience watching. I also think this is why we have the introduction of Peter B. Parker's baby, Mayday, who was likely digitally removed from a few shots of the trailer, although you can spot her here and there, alongside the introduction of a pregnant Jessica Drew. The presence of these characters propose the question, what if that was your daughter? What if your child was murdered and the culprit wasn't only running amok in the multiverse, but you had Spider-Man like Miles trying to defend him? It's quite the moral dilemma to have, and in this scenario, I'm spot on, or at least very close. Pun not intended. I'm very interested in seeing how this all plays out. But on that note, there's a character death I don't want to happen, yet I feel like it's still on the table. And that is Miles' father, Jeff. It looks like Miles and his dad will be butting heads once again in Across the Spider-Verse. Not only do we have a scene of Miles and his mom having a conversation about leaving the nest, where his dad is noticeably absent, implying they had a fight about something, but we know that Jeff already has his reservations about Spider-Man as a concept. Side note, this conversation between Miles and his mom seems to be an inversion of the iconic "I see this spark in you" conversation Miles had with his dad in the first movie. But if Jeff finds out that his son has taken over the mantle as Spidey, it's going to create friction. If Miles constantly advocates for Spidey, it's going to create friction. If Jeff continues to have a vocal disdain for Spidey, you guessed it, it's going to create friction. I think these two are going to be at odds and take each other for granted throughout the film, and it might end in tragedy. I could see the Spot attacking Miles' New York, and it leads to a heated altercation between him and the NYPD. Miles tries to intervene and handle things himself, but those clashing ideologies between him and Jeff ends up derailing their focus. In the heat of the moment, Jeff fires at the Spot, and it's the worst mistake he could have made, as the bullet goes in one end of the Spot and comes out of another, redirecting the bullet at Jeff. Should this happen, and I imagine it'd be pretty deep into the film, it'd put Miles in a position similar to Miguel. They both would have lost family to the same villain. It sent Miles into a crisis, as he's been fighting to reform the Spot the whole film, and not letting Miguel handle him earlier has now led to even more bloodshed. It'd be the real test to see if Miles will stick to his guns and still try to detain the Spot and cure him of his powers, or if he'll give in to the rage and want to kill him instead. But again, I don't want Jeff to die. Even if the video game set a precedent for it, I feel like there's still a lot to do with his character, and I'd rather have them get a happy ending, even if such a thing is foreign to Spider-Man. However, I do think Jeff getting at the very least injured by the Spot would pave the way for him and Miles to sort things out, especially if Jeff finds out Miles is Spider-Man around this point in the story. I guess we'll just have to see what happens, but the second that man has a gun pointed at the Spot, I'm clenching my chest in the theater. Last but not least, I definitely think this movie, being the first of a two-parter, will end with a major death. Not just anyone either. I think we're going to see a major spider bite the bullet. Someone whose death would bring Miles and Miguel together against a common enemy, which I don't really see being the Spot. I think he'll be the main antagonist for this film. But in classic superhero fashion, he may be working for a greater evil that'll reveal themselves at the end of the film. Perhaps Spot does want to be cured of his powers, or at least have them under control. And while Miles wants to help, Spot already has arrangements made with someone lurking in the shadows. And in a movie with a bajillion Spider-Men, it makes sense they're not all going to make it out alive. But who's on the chopping block? I think most people would hear that a Spider-Man dies and immediately jump to Peter B. Parker. And yeah, that would be pretty damn sad. He has his family now, after all. We don't want to see that taken away from him. For the longest time, it seemed like Peter B would play a smaller role in the film given how much he was excluded from the very early marketing, but this new trailer indicates he'll be decently involved. He's a safe bet for sure, even though I'd hate to see him go. It's not a major bet for me, but maybe he'd only get killed off just to be revived in the epic third act of the next film. But what if Miles and Miguel are brought together in a completely different way that doesn't see Miguel get much of a spotlight in the next film, on account of being dead? That's right, what if Miguel himself dies at the end of this movie? Tell me you couldn't see Miguel having a change of heart in the heat of the moment and making some kind of sacrificial play, protecting Miles by putting his own life on the line. Or maybe he becomes so consumed by revenge that he ends up going all out in battle, whether that be against the Spot or another villain, proving to the audience that revenge isn't the way to go as he dies tragically in battle, depriving Miles of a chance to ever make amends with him. Clearly, it's hard to gauge where the film will end, as we have very limited information to work with, but between the two big deaths in the first film and the scope of this sequel, I really can't see this ending without something to leave us jaw-dropped and heartbroken. It's Spider-Man after all! I feel like we're gonna be left itching to see the next one, with the hope that everything will end up working out. June 2023 can't come soon enough. 2023 in general is stacking up to be a huge year for the web-slinger, with Spider-Man 2 on PS5 dropping, so I can't wait to watch Across the Spider-Verse over and over again, while giving the game just as much replay. But as always, these are my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. What do you think? Who do you think's gonna bite the dust in Across the Spider-Verse? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going by giving us a follow at Vox and at Roundtable Vids on Twitter and Instagram. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the Roundtable for more great cartoon content. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. See ya!